Hello and welcome to Art Mumbai. If this is your first day here, if not, I just want to say thank you for being here for the last couple of days. We've had an amazing day one and day two here at the Mahalakshmi Racecourse. It's been a very exciting second edition for us. We're spread out over 22,000 square feet, and it feels like all of the energy of Mumbai has descended upon us. And that's thanks to all the visitors who are here. So thank you for that. Um, I would like to also take a quick moment to thank KNMA. They have sponsored the speaker series, and it's the reason why we have amazing panels like this up here to engage with you. And also Birla Opus, who has helped us build this auditorium for these 4 days for Art Mumbai. Now, getting to this panel, this is a very important one because this year is particularly important. We're going to be discussing 3 artists today who were all born in 1924. And that's the reason the panel is called At 100, because it is a discussion of looking back in the centenary year. These are the artists who, in their youth, belong to a generation that witnessed India's independence come to fore. And I think in particular, I won't go on and on about this, so this is what we're waiting to hear about from them. But we have a very exciting group of people that's going to talk to us in terms that we don't often hear about. We have a gallerist, a collector, and an academic and a curator. And I think what you'll be pleasantly surprised to hear are maybe some of the anecdotes, insights. You'll hear from those who have known the artists during their lifetimes, and I think this kind of experience is invaluable. We're being offered various perspectives on the key moments and conditions for these artists that fostered a progressive and innovative environment following India's independence. We're going to get a bit of information on how they viewed and responded, particularly to the identity of a new India at the time, the artistic idioms they were drawing from, whether in India or abroad, as many of them lived in different parts of the world. And I think what's really key for us today is whether that vision for an independent, modern identity in India still holds true today. What is it about these artists that centers us in terms of their relevance? And what is it about them that still matters so very much to us as we enter a new phase for our country, both culturally, politically, economically, and I think, if I may say so, specifically when we talk about Mumbai being a gateway to some of the artistic and cultural traditions in modern India. So with that, I'm going to hand over with a brief introduction about Kamini, which I'm going to look for a moment. Oh. So sorry, just scroll, and I don't have my glasses on. Our moderator for today's Kamini Sawhney, many of you may know her. She is a distinguished museum professional. She has over 15 years of experience. She's been elected to the board of the International Committee for Museums and Collections of Modern Art in 2022. She's the first Indian in this role, and it's very important because she serves as an advocate then for perspectives of the Global South. As the founding director of the Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore, Kamini led its launch and vision, creating an inclusive space to democratize access to art. MAP's opening exhibitions, especially the critically acclaimed Visible Invisible on women in art, which is very close to my heart, reflect her commitment to diverse narratives. Kamini also launched MAP as a digital-first museum in 2020, and separately, I have to say, in speaking to the folks who run Adobe, they had amazing things to say about what you've done, and of any museum they have worked with in Asia, it's always what you've done at MAP that stands out for them. So she's been a very vocal ambassador for Indian art. She's presented at Stanford University. She's presented at the International Tech Forum in Malaga and at Serendipity Arts Festival. She's participated in several international forums. Um, and I can go on, but she's also been the head of the Jahangir Nicholson Art Foundation at CSMVS here in Mumbai, uh, worked on collaborations with the Tate, the British Museum, and was one of the first Brooks Fellows selected to do a fellowship at the Tate Modern in 2014. She began her career in journalism at NDTV, where she then became Mumbai's bureau chief. So with that, I'd like to invite Kamini up on stage to get things going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrinal. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm delighted to be part of a panel that really brings together the co-constituents of the art world. Roobina Karode, the director and the chief curator of the KNMA, which represents really the museum space, which is so crucial in building knowledge and the arts infrastructure in the country. We have Dadiba Pundole, who was first a gallerist, now in the auction space. And that makes the whole creative process viable and sustainable, not only for artist community, but also for the whole arts ecosystem. And Dara Mehta, who is part of that very valuable community of collectors who have been supporting the artist community over the years. And I think particularly in the early years when there was so little interest, either in, there was either little interest or money for the arts. And so today we are going to be celebrating 100 years of Indian art history through Souza, Gaitonde and Ram Kumar. And as Mrinal mentioned, these were three artists they were all born exactly 100 years ago in 1924. And they were all part of this young generation of artists who witnessed freedom in India. And what they were trying to do was really to create a new idiom that was uniquely Indian and establish an international presence for modern Indian art. And all three of them, forged unique paths in their artistic journeys. They were pivotal to the Indian art history narrative in the country. And so today we are going to be exploring some aspects of their journey. We are going to be sharing memories. I did. We're going to be sharing memories and exchanging stories of how three people shaped or helped shape the journey of Indian art. And so I thought we'd begin with the now. If we're looking at 100 years down the line, what is the legacy that really these artists had? And did their creative paths really provide a path for the artists who followed them? And what is their relevance in today's world in art historical terms? So Roobina, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Mrinal. Thank you, Kamini. And thank you, Art Mumbai. And I'm sitting with two very important people who have known those artists personally. And so they would have many more stories to say. But I'll start with an artist who is not mentioned here, who also was born in 1924, K.G. Subramaniam. And since I got various opportunities to speak to him, learn from him, because I just joined Fine Arts, Faculty of Finance, and he was there still. He had not moved to Shantiniketan. I had the opportunity to learn a lot from him, interview him later also. And in one of those interviews, I asked him that, sir, what do you think about our curriculum? Because I was so interested in teaching. I was a teacher initially. And about this installation art that there's so much resistance to in our institutions and our curriculum. And how do we change that? Don't you think we should institutionalize it, in terms of curriculum and legitimize this art form? And he he had such a terrific sense of humor. And he looked at me and said, legitimize it? As far as I know, artists are only interested in illegitimate things. Okay. So it started as a conversation then to think about artists, just not about their art and practice, but also beyond that as their lives, as they led their life as artists. And I want to start by saying that the impact of these three artists, FN Souza, Ram Kumar, and Gaitonde, is extremely profound and multifaceted. And you can see in this fair itself, when you go to Saffron Art, you see these jaw-dropping Souzas and, Gaitondes, and you see in other parts of this fair as well. And you just keep thinking as an art historian, as a curator, as an institution person, that they don't fail to surprise you. They're still exploding with certain secrets, I feel, that are coming out as we go along. It's a long 100 years, though. But just quickly to wrap this up, I think their legacy is enduring. Their legacy is radical in more ways than one, I would say. And I think when we talk about what Kamini already mentioned, and this has been happening for the last 2 days in many conversations, that if we are writing our Indian art history or art and cultural history, we really, really cannot write it post-independence or just around independence unless we really go through the legacies of these artists who really diligently and dedicatedly and most importantly worked with an artistic integrity and sincerity as to what they wanted to do. How would they do away with a myopic vision and really open up a discourse that is not just about India or in India, but also takes you outside India, okay, so that you see something in an extended or expanded perspective. And really, through study, through exposure, through dialogues with many other critics and collectors or whoever they met, they really were trying to set this path for a discourse. And most importantly, what I would say, Kamini, that I felt was, it was not just them drawing influences or opening themselves to influences from outside India, from the West, okay, whether it's a Cézanne that they admired or were they influenced by somebody, and really bringing them into their new visual medium or visual language, but they were also silent. So if they're getting the West to India, they were also taking India to the West through their own experimentation, through their work, through their experiments, and through their language, So I think what they set as a path and direction for future, generations of artists was this opening up of an expanded dialogue and discourse, which is still in continuity, I would say, where artists could take a courageous leap, and see beyond and open themselves to references from all over, would know actually where to get the visual technologies from, where to get the mediums from, where to get some kind of an understanding of techniques, but really use them for a India-rooted modernity, if I can put it that way.
Yeah. When you were talking about reaching out and all of them taking their art to the world, one of the core constituents that I wanted to mention here, besides all the other ones that we have on stage, is all of you, the audience. Because without the viewer, the art lover, and the audience, art can be created. But it is only when you respond or you react or you interact that the whole process of creation is complete. So Dadiba, I wanted to come to you because all these artists really had reached the top in terms of their value in the art market. And you dealt with them so closely, all three of them. So what really is the impact that they had on the art market, because they are all at the top, as I said, of their value, and what is the relevance to the buyer today?
Look, sadly, we tend to look at everything from a perspective of price, and that's where I think things do get a bit distorted. And to an extent, like Roobina rightly said, we've all forgotten an artist like K.G. Subramaniam, also born in 1924, who's probably commercially not as successful as the other three. So that is an aspect which I think needs relooking at. Yes, they've all been commercially successful and justifiably so, because the contribution over the years has been huge to Indian art, because every generation just distills a small percentage of artists finally that sustain and survive. And what makes them sustain and survive is consistency over a period of time along with progression. So I think all three of them didn't have much of a choice but modernism in front of them. It was that whole fervor in India at that time. And there was that curiosity, they wanted to know. They had very little reference material. Okay, oil as a medium had already come to India a few decades ago, but the way of looking had changed. But if you look at all three of them, all their subject matter remains Indian. Whether it's Souza, he's painting uh, the Goan landscape, even though he's in Bombay then. You look at Ram Kumar, he's looking at the common man around him that he's surrounded by, and that awkward situation where India is urbanizing and he feels discomfort and can see it in others, which he portrays in his work. And Gaitonde is strongly influenced by what must have been his class then of, Indian style painting.
Yeah.
And his inspiration from miniature paintings comes a little later. But the imagery in his early work, when you look at, comes from there. So, and it's flat, two-dimensional.
Yes.
So he's taken something from the West and yet internalized it for himself.
Yeah, I think all of them drew on traditions in the traditions of Indian art as well, and then responded to developments in the global world. Dara, you came onto the scene a little later in collecting terms. You started collecting around the 90s. So what drew you to the modernists, particularly the ones you chose, as against the other kind of contemporary and modern art that existed?
So I think growing up in Bombay, most of the progressives were from Bombay or settled in Bombay, even if Hussain, Raza, Souza were not from Bombay. My dad had a quintessential Hussain horse painting, which he had bought from Dadiba's fathers. So you grew up with them, you saw them here and there. Not that too many people, I think in all the friends that we had with 3 paintings, we must have had the most paintings. Most people's houses didn't have a single painting, even I think till the mid 90s or late 90s, if not later. So that's how one got interested in them. It does obviously take time to develop your sensibilities. So, example, Souza was the most accessible. We used to buy Souza drawings for like 1,500 rupees. Dadiba would have a stack, and then you'd go through the whole stack and pick up some. Ram Kumar was also very, very nice. There was one particular one that I really, really loved. It was quite a large one. And it was, Dadiba was at that time in fort, and he had this rickety staircase with the whole sort of mezzanine or a go down upstairs. So one day he pulled out this lovely Ram Kumar. So I said, how much? And that time the price may have been 50, 60, 70,000. So he said, no, I'm not selling it. So I said, now forget it, just say what is the price. So he said, no, I won't sell it, but if you give me your dad's Hussain in exchange. So I said, my dad will throw me out of the house and you. Obviously Gaitonde was the most esoteric. When we were in college, I yet remember Bonhams, I think, or Phillips, one of them had a auction at Oberoi, at the downstairs room and that time Dadiba said, buy a Gaitonde. And you were like, are you mad? 10 lakhs of rupees, we'll buy a Mercedes or something. No, that one, but before that, then Dinesh had an auction, and that time he used to have his previews on his terrace at Rusi House. So obviously tastes develop over a period of time. The one good thing that actually auctions have done is that they made works accessible from different periods. Otherwise, we could only see what the artist was producing then. And let's say I had a relationship very, very slightly with Hussain, more with Akbar, been to his house, he's come over, but I didn't have a relationship with any of these 3. And I think in a way, sometimes that's a benefit. Because like today's friends of mine, today the world has totally changed. Which gallery, who's pushing it, where has the artist jumped, which foreign gallery will represent them, which museum it will go to. And a lot of my friends say, Arey, now, I'm collecting. So even if I don't like the work, the gallerist is my friend or the artist is my friend. If he says or she says, oh, this is very good, you should get it, how can I say no? So I think one of the advantages of not knowing the artist is you don't get influenced by all of these things. Because I firmly believe if an artist has to explain more than 20-30 seconds what's the work, then then the work is not talking for itself. So here at least I had the advantage that you're only buying what you like, not because of any extraneous factor, and what you can afford, which at one time affordability wasn't a problem, but there was no access. Okay, and the thing is also depend who. There were 2, 3, 4 galleries. Now I mean I liked Tayyab when Tayyab was at 6 lakhs, but everyone's benchmark was always Hussain. So the question is, how can you pay 6 lakhs for a Tayyab who we didn't know he existed or who he was? And Hussain is 2 lakhs. Now, I didn't really deal with Keku Gandhi, so I had no knowledge about Tayyab. So I'm sure if Pandols was representing Tayyab, then you'd have known why Tayyab is 6 lakhs and not 2 lakhs. So it was a very different thing. But I think one of the things that I know Dadiba said that things have become too commercial. Honestly, you walk around this fair and some of the prices for very nice works but not seminal works. What's happening is if one great one does X at auction, everyone wants to sell everything from halfway nice at X. That can't sustain in the long term. So, but at the same time, prices are important because if these artists were not recognized, and with price is unfortunately or fortunately one of the benchmarks for recognition. Okay. So the thing is, to be recognized, to be considered great, to be considered desirable, price is one of the sort of byproducts of that.
Yeah.
So it is also important. However great an artist is, if he's available at 2 lakhs today, nobody's going to talk about him. Okay. But like Dadiba had said, like look at Nasreen when it was 2 lakhs. Now at 2 crores, more people want a Nasreen than at 2 lakhs. Otherwise it was, what is this? Just some lines with a ruler.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about price because I remember Jeru Mango telling me a story of how when Raza had come back and he priced his paintings at 500. Hussain was saying, no, then I'm not pricing my paintings at 200. If Raza is pricing it at that, then mine also has to be the same price. So it's interesting how even artists responded in that way to pricing. But I was struck by one thing that you said, that you bought a lot of Souzas. And most times when I speak to collectors, Souza was not the first one that they bought because his paintings were difficult to display, and most of them who bought it, actually it was all stacked away in drawers inside. So how come you went for Souza?
So
Souza did paint things besides nudes. Huh? It's not that he only painted nudes.
No, and I mean, we are a Parsi family. My parents were liberal. So there was none of that sort of stuff in doing that.
Okay. So post-independence, the market actually, the audience, let us say, was really not ready yet for modern art in India, and they didn't manage to make too much of an impact internationally as well, because in the early days, Indian art was considered to be decorative, provincial, derivative. And then in the 1990s, you had the auction houses enter, and that kind of changed everything because it led to a repositioning of art. Because if you wanted to sell art, you had to establish its economic value. And to establish its economic value, you first had to establish a cultural and an aesthetic value. And so then began this whole idea of providing a context to Indian art, to building up the whole stories about the artists, giving their backgrounds. So, Roobina, do you want to tell us how did we manage to set that cultural context? What did we change in the retelling of our narratives?
So, if I understood you well, I think a lot changed since then. In fact, when you talked about these artists and interestingly, sometimes in the museum, we come across works behind which we see prices like 150 rupees or even 1,000 rupees or 500 rupees of, work by Raza or something. So just talking about how this thing has happened, I think one of the things that these artists resisted and then later on, it became part of our narrative was that this colonial hangover had to get over. I recently rewrote a piece on Souza after learning a lot more about him. And the understanding is the resistance is so amazing in terms of how really in being part of a colonial system of education, how would you overthrow it, subvert it, resist it? And I'm rereading some of his early Grey Nudes and other works where he has combined all the three learnings that come from academic curriculum, which is portraiture, landscape, and news, together and turned it around by spinning a narrative of a very different kind, which is embedded in it, but through the techniques that were, taught at JJ School. And similarly, when you go through many of these earlier things, you realize that the emphasis was so much on, yes, what Ravi Verma at some point said or did, that we will take the technique of oil painting, which Dadiba was talking about, and use it against them. Which is take the technique and paint Indian subject matters, paint Indian mythology, paint Indian gods and goddesses, and make them so real, and also move them away from, create a possibility to democratize them by moving them out of temples into homes and homes to streets. And that's how it came from very, very respected works that were in Maharaja's collection, to then oleographs that brought them into homes, and then on streets through further calendars being created. So it's a very interesting way how the three artists, worked, not just these three, even Hussain is very important in this conversation, and many others who really worked to realize that the Eurocentric gaze or the view about declaring miniatures as savage, okay, or declaring anything that was created in India as not superior, okay, as not something that can be, of quality, was challenged and in fact disrupted. That notion was disrupted by these three artists in a very strong way. And I think this retelling of the Indian narrative, I think, begins right there. How do we write our own history? And I really would say, not that I met Souza often. I met him at two instances. Once when Al-Qazi had created a huge show of his, which was shown at the Academy of Fine Arts, in Delhi, and Souza was there to talk to students or whoever had to ask questions. And here is this man who carries this frown and who is such a caustic orator and a very hard-hitting kind of a person, even when he talks about his own work, and he was standing there and he was explaining to us about what he did and how for him, it was so important to break many of the categories and established notions that came with Indian art at that time. And therefore, this whole thing about doing away with establishments and trying to set a path, he wanted to not participate, correct me if I'm wrong, Dadiba, in the Bombay Society exhibitions. After a while, he said, no, this is not something that I value. Okay, so there were so many actions taken simultaneously by these artists, really. And I think that really brought an attention of a different kind to them, both art historically as well as in 90s, as you rightfully said, when the auction houses came about, how do you really represent these artists? What are they doing? And I would say for Souza, of course, words and lines. He was a man who believed in articulating his vision, articulating his views, and words and lines completely changed his his place as an artist. Not just here in London, in other places, people started reading his words and lines and understanding that here was a man who had no stopping. He could call spade a spade. He was completely unabashed in talking about his views, and he gave it right, left, and center to whoever he wished to. Whether it was Bacon, it didn't matter. Whether it was someone else, a critic from there, didn't matter to him. And that was Souza's personality. Here is an completely opposite personality in Gaitonde.
Yes.
Who just was not a wordy artist. He didn't believe in words. He won't even believe in talking if you went and met him.
In fact, he says, Lakshman, the reason I like you is you understand the value of silence.
Yes. And then, when I spoke with Krishan Khanna often about Gaitonde, because I could never get much from the artist, and Krishan Khanna would tell, what you learn from Gaitonde, that silence is not absence of communication. Okay, and the way that I learned about Gaitonde sitting at the Bhulabai Desai Institute, watching the sea and the horizon of Mumbai, and how the chaos in front of it and a silent horizon behind, appears into his work. There are so many ways to, and so that is an artist who doesn't believe in words. Now you have to decide how to go about with him and how will that narrative be written about. But there were not one single view or single belief actually that existed. There were narratives that were set rolling because of the way that these artists really worked, presented themselves, and considered themselves really creative free agents or creative free individuals. I would say that it was not just important for them that they were modern artists or they wanted to create art. They also wanted to live as an artist. They wanted to live the artist's life, whatever that meant. Eccentricities, we know stories about that. Not going and living in prostitute areas. Souza did that. We know about that. They wanted to live and embrace an artist's life.
Yeah.
That was very important for this narrative to begin.
And one of the things, Kamini, that sets these artists apart, that whole generation, I don't know about the others who didn't make it, but the stories that you hear about the ones who have made it is surprisingly what ego and self-confidence they had when nobody was buying their works.
Yes.
So that was something that is amazing when you hear these stories. That's one. Two is the dedication to their art. Like, I think sometimes, like, you can either buy art because you like it, fill up your walls when you're doing a house. And then for some people, it becomes like a passion. And over a period of time, it becomes like a stewardship of their journey and their history, even if you've never met them. And like, when you read that they didn't even have money for a stamp. So whoever was in Paris, they would all write a letter to whoever was in Bombay and then say, okay, now I'm writing to you, this one's writing to this one, all coming in one envelope because we can afford one stamp. Or like, basically going hungry for a long time. So like, I've heard this story about how Ram Kumar would take the long way back to his studio because the short way past a bakery and the smell would drive him crazy because he was hungry. So when you see that that's what they've gone through, that's a very, very different world from what art has become, I would say, from the 80s or even the 90s. And that's why I was trying to message Zoya to put up the image because there were two, three. I've given an image of one of each artist because you had said, why you collect, how you collect. I also believe that there's a lot of luck and destiny for a collector, for a collection, and also for the for the painting itself. So, example, the Gaitonde that we have was actually commissioned by Air India to commemorate their first transatlantic flight. And when Gaitonde gave it to them, they said, no, basically buzz off, we don't like it. And he was like, I spent $200 on the canvas, so now how will I eat? So Bal Chhabda, who is now slowly getting his due as a artist, was also well off, had a gallery, supported all of them, so he bought it. And then it was, I think, above his bed, right, for his whole life. So even today, it's sort of known as the Air India Gaitonde or the Bal Chhabda Gaitonde. And all paintings do how they are presented, how they are lit, in what context they are shown. So I first saw this work at a gallerist slash dealer's house against a stone wall. And it was one of the most... Okay, can we... No. Can we see the Gaitonde for a minute? So it just looks sublime. Then the same work, but at that time they were asking like a crazy price, like possibly the second highest price ever for any Indian work of art. So obviously no one bought it. And then they put it up at Satvi's, where in that huge room on a white wall, it looked dead. So you got it for much, much cheaper. Even downstairs at my parents' house, it looked nice, but it didn't have that vitality. And now when I moved it upstairs to my apartment, and lighting makes a huge difference. So
The mic. Angle the mic to you. Keep the mic to your mouth.
So works really sing differently. So they've gone through these struggles. If we go back to the Ram Kumar, the Ram Kumar figurative, generally most of his figuratives have male figures. Zoya, can we see the Ram Kumar? So this one is quite unique because it's
This Souza.
this is the Souza, the first one that you had on. No, the first one. Yeah. So this is one of the rarer ones that has a soul woman, and the only one that I've seen which looks into the mirror. And the question how it came onto the market is because a very significant collector didn't want nudes in his collection. Another very significant collector left a written bit because he or she was busy. So you managed to get it. And so it's also a lot of luck of how things happen. If you see the Souza, so there's another collector who has also, since he told me his name, I can say it, Masonry. So if we go to the Pieta, can we go to the Souza? Masonories had immense success both buying and selling. And he always believed in putting things at very attractive estimates and then they would fly. So he put this in at some 22 lakhs and Lehman Brothers collapsed the day before the auction. So that's how I managed to get it at the low, because otherwise it would have gone crazy, because I think there are only 2 full Pietas that Souza has ever done. And you can own, and can we see the last image? And you can own paintings for decades and really discover something. So very recently, Saffron Art sold a huge standing nude cut off at the knees by Akbar, which KNMA bought. I didn't realize, I bought this work in 2010. I didn't realize that this is actually the sister painting or companion piece, because it's the same narrative, a lady cut at the knee, a lady holding something in her left hand. And if you can see over here, that whole painting is mustard. So I always wondered, what is this mustard underlayer? So maybe when they were painting together, they started, or Padamsi started and did it first in mustard. And then Souza obviously has layered it with different colors on top. But if that painting hadn't come out, then you'd never even know that it existed and they'd done it at the same time in the same studio in Paris. So you can find out things. And one credit I have to say to museum shows. So I think certain artists have really got their due because of what KNM is doing. So I have discovered, or not discovered, but I've been buying this artist called Sharbari Rai Chaudhary, who even today is very accessible in terms of price. But KNMA did a superb show. I'll be honest, I've never gone to their Noida space, but this time I specifically went towards far. And I think showing these artists with other more famous artists and showing how the quality holds up makes a huge difference.
Anyway.
And one last thing is that because we were talking about them being derivative, we always thought that they were aping the West. So Asia Society had what I think is one of the most outstanding shows on the progressives.
Yes.
Not just for the quality of works, but they then put miniatures and sculptures and showed that how Raza and others' influence was actually Bundi paintings from 500 years ago, and not what you call Rothko or somebody like that. So I think scholarship is extremely important, as you said, first to create the market, but then also to differentiate between artists, between practices, and finally between quality.
Yeah, thanks for all those stories.
In
Dara.
fact, when you look at these Souzas, we clearly know this is so inspired by miniatures and also sculptures, Indian sculptures.
Very strongly
It's
sculptures,
not that
actually.
his nudes look like anything in the West. They're completely. The transformation is because
The
he
dimensions.
was yes.
Yeah, complete.
So
Anyway, Dadiba, I wanted you to tell us really about the early years, especially when artists were really struggling at that time. So how did you present this also to you? You were dealing both with the artist and with people who came in, the audience, viewer. How did you build up this whole infrastructure for them?
Well, that hard work was done by my dad and not me. So I got it quite easy. But I think this whole group of artists that we are referring to, probably only wanted to paint. There was no second choice or option for them. And they were willing to go through the grind, whatever it meant. So when Ram Kumar tells his father that he wants to be a painter, and he had already started in Delhi taking evening classes but wanted to go to Paris, his father was a very modest means. So he bought him a one-way ticket to Paris and said, son, after this, don't come to us for anything else. So he goes to Paris, and Raza, who's there, gives him his studio to live in, because Ram Kumar would go for morning and evening classes, which is when Raza would come there to paint. He didn't live there. And he would work through the day. So one evening, Ram Kumar's at the studio, and a Frenchman, a client, a patron, walks in and says, I have an appointment with Monsieur Raza. And Ram Kumar says, I'm sure he'll be coming, just wait. And this wait goes on, and Raza doesn't show up. And to cut a long story short, the guy says, oh, what do you do? And he says, oh, I'm also a painter. So can I see your work? And he acquires a painting. And Ram Kumar is thrilled.
I can imagine. No?
Anyway, those were not days of phones and all. So next day when he meets Raza, he says, Monsieur so-and-so had come and, he was very upset not finding you. So he says, okay, what happened? So he said, no, then he saw my work and he bought one. So he said, that's the exact reason why I didn't show up. I was hoping it would happen. So, so sales
generous
were...
artists were at that time to each other.
Exactly. And, sales were few and far between. And when any artist of that group made a sale, that evening was a party for everyone. So I don't know how much of that money went home. But that's how they lived. They literally lived day to day. But they were all very clear that the only thing they would do is paint and nothing else.
So these artists really forged new paths. Each had a unique language of their own.
Absolutely.
And they're so sought
And they
after.
worked together. It was not that they were working in the privacy of the independent studio and the other couldn't walk in. Anyone was welcome. There was no insecurity that my idea is going to be stolen, which I sense today.
Oh, absolutely.
They were supremely
There was a
confident
generosity of
themselves.
spirit, right? And a sort of camaraderie between them. Yeah.
And you were asking about how prices changed. So in the 1990s, early 1990s, my dad had passed away in 1990. An elderly Gujarati lady walks up, introduces herself, says, you don't know me, but may I please sit? So I said, sure, by all means. So she said, I could never thank your dad, so I've come to thank you. So I said, about what? So he says, my husband used to be very interested in art, and he would regularly buy paintings from your father. I remember the building they lived in, because she said, I live in Brighton. And she said he wanted to buy a Gaitonde, which was priced at 8,000 rupees. And she said, I was fed up of my husband. I'd been asking him to get the house painted for years, and he would keep deferring it. And I put my foot down and I said, if you're going to spend 8,000 rupees on this painting, you'll first paint the flat. So I don't know what your father and he did, but he took me over to meet your father. That's the only time I met him. So I don't know what your dad did, but he finally left me convinced that he could buy the work. And I've come to thank you that today that painting wouldn't help to paint my flat. It could probably help to buy my flat.
But you know what? It's so amazing to hear this, but it's also very interesting to remember that all three of them were active till 2000. So they did see their struggle period and their artist status go up. But I went to Ram Kumar's house maybe in 2000 for something, and he lived the same way as he had lived all his life. The same modesty, the same simplicity. The man was absolutely simple. I went there in the evening to discuss something with him, and he made me sit down. He gifted me a book in Hindi of his. And there was a guy who had come, a plumber had come to fix the geyser. And the conversation I'm overhearing sitting in that room is, so what has happened to the geyser? So the guy is saying, sir, 20 years purana geyser hai, okay? Ab nahi chal sakta, something like that. And I'm sitting there just looking in my book. And Ram Kumar said, 20 years है तो देखो अभी कुछ कर सकते हो तो चल सकता है क्यों नहीं चल सकता ये क्या हुआ है ये सब. So the conversation was that, and I was sitting there and thinking, these are they so untouched by completely what is happening in their lives, that there is this level of simplicity and integrity. I don't know. I just came back, just ruminating on that moment that I was there. And twice or thrice when I met him, I carried the same impression of the man, that it is perhaps a lesson to all in this time. To remain so untouched.
I think he was just temperamentally very
Or
frugal.
just temperamentally
He was
also.
just very frugal.
Of course, he was frugal. He was also somebody, a recluse, in a shy man in that sense.
But there
sadly-
were also differences, because by the end, Hussein was buying Bugatti Veyrons for millions on a
That's
Amex
true.
plan.
I was coming to that.
Yeah, but the difference
And
is
his
that
cars.
the person who couldn't make actually was Souza, because even in 1999, his works are not really selling. He's hard up for money, and he sells Golgotha in Goa, one of his favorite paintings, which he painted in 1948. And then he's forced to sell it he held on to it right through and then sold it in 1999 because he was short of money. So it's varied, the story, but
It is, yes, it is.
the story is varied.
And one other thing is, Dadiba was talking about, generosity of spirit. But also they were very, like Ram Kumar, Gaitonde and Hussein were very different. But Souza, Raza and Padamsi, they all did conical houses in Paris at the same time. So I have a Padamsi that most people first guess it's a Souza, then they guess it's a Raza. I have a oil on paper in London, which looks exactly like a Souza, and everyone is surprised that it's a Padamsi. So, they were heavily influenced by each other. But then I think by the mid 50s and early 60s, artistically, physically, in all ways, they went their own ways.
No,
Though remaining close friends.
let me put this right, and this is what I've heard for sure. It was Raza on a visit to Italy in 1950 that came back and started these elongated buildings. Both Souza and Padamsi saw it and found something interesting in it.
Hey.
Padamsi always acknowledged that it was Raza's influence and that yes, he took it and lifted it. Souza claimed it to be his own. That was the difference.
So now I really want each one of you all to talk about one work from these three artists which was pivotal to your institution or organization or collection. And Roobina, I want you to begin with Birth. That work that was sold, that the KNMA bought for 28 crores. You can go ahead with.
I can tell you. So is there somebody? Yeah.
You want to choose another one? Go ahead.
Talk about the Red Road and the butcher.
Okay, sure.
So I don't know whether the images are here or not. Just say.
Can you show Red Road and Butcher for Roobina, Zoya?
So Kiran was very drawn to Souza's practice, and of course she had made an incredible collection. But this story particularly has stayed with me since she told me.
Roobina, just hold the mic towards your mouth.
Yeah. But before that, there is a Red Road, I think.
Zoya, the one before, Red Road. Okay, we are out of. We need to open this to the audience, yeah?
Is it the second one? I don't know who's put it in order.
This is The Butcher.
No.
Starting.
Is there one more that
No,
you have,
the
Zoya?
story
No.
is
Okay.
starting from Red Road, so I was asking.
Okay.
So there is a picture called...
Oh, there you are.
Yes.
Oops.
Let it go.
There it is.
Yes. So
That way.
Red Road came in, and Kiran was completely wanting this painting. And as Dadiba said, that even wherever they were painting their native landscapes and native memories, through their work, using techniques, of course, which were more modern in approach. So Kiran went and got this, but there was another painting which also came up, which was The Butcher.
Which is the next slide.
Next slide, please.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, butcher of birth, I don't know which
The
one.
butcher.
Oh, yeah. But Tina Mani got the birth one, I think.
Birth one, and then
Yeah,
you all bought
next,
it in.
so
yeah.
the next one, please. Yeah. And so this painting came up, and then she was very drawn to get this work, but she had already got the red road. And she started bidding, but at some point of time, she just realized that it was too much. And this painting, no, by the time she started bidding, she was told that the painting is gone and is being sold. And the painting was collected by, was acquired by Tina Ambani.
Yes.
Okay?
Amini, yeah.
And then she felt very bad that she lost this very seminal work of Souza, Birth. It's also a very mysterious painting. You know, there's a pregnant, fully pregnant woman naked lying there, and there's a man sitting next to her. And the birth is to happen, but you know, and it's a very interesting painting to decode. But then 7 years later or 8 years later, she kept remembering that I lost birth, which was something that I should have bought, you know, and I've lost the painting. I've lost the painting. It's a very important work, and then 8 years later, Tina Ambani decided to
Put it back on the
to
market.
say goodbye to this painting, and she acquired it. And I think it was the happiest day of her life, because she kept saying that this was meant to be in the museum. So that's why it's come back to us. So the birth is what is at the KNMA collection. And one of the other works that is really seminal, which was The Butcher that I was trying to show, very hard-hitting work, as you can see, a very huge work made by Souza. And Souza was known to make even very large canvases, you know, and here is one. But what is very striking about the work is it is so focused on the butcher and his brutal act, which is also his mundane act of the everyday, okay, as a butcher. And yet, if you see the stark light and dark contrast, he's only playing through light, playing through the contrast. The environment is completely claustrophobic. It could be a night scene, who knows? The butcher is still working at his job. And I think I have not seen something so powerful in terms of the anatomy of the face.
Yes.
You can't see it in this in this slide, but if you see the image, how he really creates this mangled kind of anatomy, you know, facial anatomy and contour, so powerful and so scary at the same time. I mean, I had put it in an exhibition that I'd curated in a corner. So when you enter, you don't know, but when you enter into that room and actually face the corner, you really step back, literally. It is so powerful and a very compelling kind of image of
Actually,
the
you had
butcher.
shoved it at the end of a corridor. When you turn round.
Yeah. Dadiba, I wanted you to talk about the work. You know, when we were working on the Ram Kumar show, you had so many interesting stories to tell me. And you told me about how the work of Ram Kumar in 1982 actually got Nicholson to start collecting again, someone who had stopped collecting because prices had gone so high. Tell us that whole history.
I think that was around 83 or so that Mr. Jangir Nicholson felt that now prices were beyond him. And this is a cycle which I think most collectors go through. When you bought things at certain price points and then they sort of drastically go up, you feel, I've had my fill, I need to stop. And he had stopped collecting for 2 or 3 years. And it was the 86 exhibition solo of Ram Kumar, where he walked in one evening. Obviously, he had finished work for the day, and 3 of us were chatting, my dad, him, and me. And over a period of time, I think he must have been there for about an hour and a half. And they said, I think I've been wrong. And he bought this vertical painting, which was right next to the entrance on the right, for 18,000 rupees. And that's where he starts buying again, in 1986.
Yeah, that's such a lovely story. And Dara, you showed us that wonderful work of Gaitonde, the Bal Chabra Gaitonde. I want you to tell us the story behind how you actually acquired it. What was the hub, how you managed to chase it for many years till you finally got it into the collection?
No, that the one I chased for many years was Masonry's Horse and Woman.
Then why don't you tell
This-
us whichever is an
Yeah,
interesting
so
story.
this one, what happened is certain works look dead in catalogs. So if I had only, and that time there was no video and Zoom call to see it, right? So no WhatsApp to send pictures. What you saw in the
Catalog.
you tried your best, and
That
most
was
of the
it.
time you were okay. So you didn't make mistakes by buying, but you would have often lost things. And there were one or two collectors who would fly to New York for like just 24 hours. And sometimes I'd wish I'd done that, because if you make that effort and you go and you see something, then you'll push yourself to buy it. But anyway, this one I was lucky that it was being shown in London, and they set the price, so I was not going to buy it at that price. But they said, no, no, it's just a seminal work. You should come and see it. So I went, and you walk in, and couple of times in my life it's happened where you just see a work and you say like, oh my God. So I walked in. Then they're talking about price, this, that. So I was like, and a dealer walks in. And just before I left. And at that time, which was completely crazy, the dealer who would have not had that much money tells him this is worth it. You can't afford the whole thing, I can't afford the whole thing. Let's make an offer of 3.2 million, we'll buy it half. So that also made me realize that if a dealer is willing to give that sort of an offer, which is just totally crazy, and he's doing it possibly by selling other works only for money and all. Anyway, I said even half of three. First of all, half is a problem. He'll want to sell, you won't want to sell, etc. So I said, no, nowhere half. And 3.2 is also crazy. And we left. And then suddenly, I think that work landed up at auction at 2.5 million, and there were no buyers. And I got it at 2.3. And
It's
that
destined for you.
and one of the things is because someone who has seen a lot of this art, lived with it, for all his quirks, I mean, masonry has a great eye. So when he came to my house, 2, 3 interesting things came out. One was that he had consigned the Pieta. The second one was he was the underbidder for the Bal Chabda Gaitonde.
Yeah.
And in fact, he told me that when he first went to Chabda's house, he loved this work, but he loved one more. So it was a toss up for him whether he got this or he got that. So, I mean, and I'll be very honest with you, everyone told me it doesn't look nice at Sadhvi's in New York. It looks horrible. And at that time, the only way to actually gauge a painting is that if it was at Sadhvi's, I would send the people from Christie's to see it. And if it was at Christie's, I would send the people from Sadhvi's to see it. And if the rival auction house was forced to say this is amazing, then you'd know. But here, though, everyone said this is looking crap. So if I hadn't seen it in London in the flesh, there is no way that one would bid for it. And I think why this work is important is obviously, I'm presuming in 62, Dadiba being commissioned by Air India would have been like a huge thing for Gaitonde. I mean, this is the largest canvas that he's ever done. So obviously he was trying to do something ambitious and significant. And then the disappointment that he must have been gone through to say that, buzz off. Which is why even today I tell collectors don't commission works. I have a Krishan Khanna, which was sold as first anatomy lesson. When I took the book to Krishan to sign, he said, what nonsense, we are giving this guy sort of ether in his mouth. If it was an anatomy lesson, why would we be? So he cancelled that and he said, this is Charak's first operation. That had been commissioned by Glaxo. When he gave it to Glaxo said, who's going to put this morbid thing in our office? We are all about health. Please take this away from here. So I think it's always better. This very fashionable, what do you call, commissioned it. It's all site specific for my house and for my garden. I at least believe it's always best see the work and see where it fits. So considering what he must have put into that work, considering the disappointment, and then considering that Baal saved him. So there's a lot of emotion attached to that work.
Okay. I'm sorry, we've got lost in the conversation. We must throw it open now to questions. So whoever would like to ask a question, please go ahead.
The mic, hopefully, or the clients.
I actually met all these artists and I knew them. And now looking at these images and realizing the enormity of their contribution. If I may say this, I don't know, perhaps it's ignorance. Not enough has been done to counter this derivative thing, which I think still wants us. And it's amazing what they did compared to what. So I'm mixing up two things. So one is that we should do more to make this known where the inspiration came from. Okay, even in Hussein's work, you can see the influence of sculpture. That was one. I'd like to know what you'll think. And the second thing is that these were people who were committed. I mean, there's no doubt about that. If you look at the art scene in India today, how much of this kind of passion and commitment and to give their lives almost do we see among the artists? I think, I don't know if I'm being again judgmental, but aren't people now so aware of the commercial world that more catering to that is being done? And I don't mean to make this as a blanket statement, but is this evident as a change from that time to this time?
Well, I think you as a gallerist should be answering that as well. Is it or is it not?
I thought you see one saying, obviously, fine. Obviously, my question came from the background as a gallerist, but I don't have the answers.
Well, I think times are a lot easier now. It's very difficult to put things into perspective when they, it's like even when they try and sort of judge sports people of different eras. How do you judge it? Situations were different, circumstances were different, games were played differently. So I'm not really in that space to be able to answer it, but I certainly think it's a lot easier now. You don't need that kind of commitment today that you needed then.
I think one different way of looking at it is that the few people who supported them, Bal Chhabra, Keku Gandhi, Kali Pandole, I think their commitment was definitely higher than gallerists internationally today. They'll take an artist, pump it up if it works, especially in the West. If it works, it works. Otherwise, it just crashes and they dump the artist. So definitely the commitment of those who were supporting art was much higher than.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it works on both sides in the same way. And I agree that, we're not living in dire times, but there has to be, even if you adjust it for the times, and do you think it still holds?
I think let us artists decide that.
Can I just add a little to this? I think if I go back to the time when these artists began, and that was a really critical time, just post-independence, India is a new nation. I think we all know stories about how they lived, how they lived, how they struggled. I mean, Dadiba would know more. Ara living in a, working as a car cleaner, in a Japanese factory and living in a little Sowan quarter or something else. We know these stories. More than that, I think the struggle they had was, it was not the time where a lot was happening to really facilitate and support the artist. The artist funds, sponsors, scholarships, to travel the world came much later. Curation came much later in India. Okay, it was earlier. It's like they are the curating cultures and we are the curated cultures. Let's put it that way. The West and India. So curation was not there. Artists work as it needs to be seen beyond what an artist can do. I always feel, and I've seen Himmat Shah, Jairam Bhai, many other artists when I was talking about it, they did not even know whether they wanted their works to be given to anyone else. Like Jairam, till he lived, he was sitting on his works from 1950s to 2000. Under his bed, he had preserved those works. Okay. So they produced their art, they created the work, but really they did not know exactly what could they do with it. Okay, what is the idea of archiving? What is the idea of a legacy? I mean, I've read about Picasso when he put first line on his Guernica, when he made all the drawings for Guernica. He documented everything as if he knew it was for posterity. His art will be for posterity. The thing that happens is that artists cannot do everything. Artists can perhaps not really steer everything. All these things happen much later in India, forms of, institutional supports, sponsorships and scholarships, curated exhibitions, art historians focusing and writing. There were no artistry books on artists here, So this whole thing that needs to be done, because I was just thinking when we were talking, the question that I asked myself is quality alone for an artist to create his or her legacy, okay? Or no, if it is not just quality of the work that can create the legacy, then what will create it? Who creates it? For what? These are questions, and these are still questions that need to be thrown up from time to time and to be asked to learn, because then it means that the legacy of the artist needs much more. Somebody documenting, somebody inventorying, somebody archiving, somebody curating it, putting a context to it, giving it relevance for today. Today, if I curate a show, can I curate it the way I curated it 25 years ago? I will have to ask this question to myself. Okay? How will I create the relevance of Souza now if I curate an exhibition? At that time, the story is different. Okay? If somebody puts a Souza show in 60s. Today, if I do it, do I not have to think much more? Do I not have to think critically about many things that Souza did or Souza's practice really brings forward? Which way would I look at it? So I think this whole thing that we are talking about, what I was saying in the beginning, this extension of this discourse, and the conversations that have now opened up, are really things that did not exist at the time that these artists started. It came 40 years later to them, okay? So I think for these artists, the younger generations, for instance, if I go back to Bhupen Thakkar, these artists would have been great influence, because they were actually, when we see Bhupen, we say, oh, David Hockney was a great inspiration for him. Fine, he was. But everything that Bhupen did is embedded in our culture. You cannot read Bhupen unless you read the Indian narrative or the Indian history or culture as it exists in our places. Our streets, our towns, our kind of sangat. It cannot.
Sorry to interrupt, Roobina. Very sorry.
Yeah,
But
Vishal,
do
maybe
you
we can-
do you see that today? I want to respond something very important. She said, "Do you see that today in the work that's being made?"
I think artists are committed even today, especially in a place like Pakistan where the appreciation and funding for art is even less. I've heard that Rashid Rana keeps an artist proof of every work that he's done, because eventually he wants to start a museum and give that to the country of Pakistan. So it's not that people are not committed today. I think you can today, let's put it this way, my father or grandfather might have been committed to their job at starting at 100 rupees a month. Today, youngsters are as committed, but they start at maybe even as high as 10 lakhs a month. So that doesn't mean you're not committed just because you're earning more. Sometimes the pressure may be even more.
Pressure
Any
could
more
also be
questions?
time and the pace.
Anyone else for a question? There.
I would like to ask all of you generally about the atmosphere of art, the way art is written about, for instance. In the older days, we had the newspapers covering, the major newspaper had a arts page, which has completely been demolished. And the reason I was told is that artists are not important, and the more important people are the industrialists and the corporate class and what they're doing with the economy. So I'm wondering if you are saying that there is a kind of nurture of art, or let's say an appreciation or critical work, but it's also discreet. Why can't the newspapers, which all over the world have something to do with art and serious writing on art, If you know what I
Internationally,
mean.
the newspapers have a lot of coverage of art and
Yes.
very serious writing on art.
Yes.
I mean, the Financial Times has a whole art section every Saturday.
Yes, I
Um,
read that.
The Times and the
But
Daily
why can't we
Telegraph.
have it in India?
I think in India,
You know,
things have moved more to
And the
the social.
persuaders are people like
No,
you.
no, but today a lot
Yeah.
of things have moved to social media, which even I'm not on. But I had lunch with a friend of mine. She said she just posted a painting at one of the booths of a gallery she has no relationship with and of an artist that she's never bought, but she loved that work. And the gallerist the next day came up to her and said, "Thank you. Not only did that work sell, 7 other works of the artist not at the show sold." So I think certain things have moved from print to digital or social media, which we may not be as sort of following.
Yes, but writing is something else.
No,
Writing
it
is
is.
different.
But now, how the world goes, even sports, the coverage in India is much less now.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
don't forget that artists are anti-establishment. And art is actually a brilliant tool to interrogate systems, values, all of that. And governments all over the world tend to have a healthy respect for the art world, but they're also extremely wary of them. And I think sometimes in certain spaces, the space for art is shrinking.
But it's a pertinent question because I remember a little story that Winston Churchill was asked by his administrators during the wartime that, we need more money to put into war, so why don't we cut the funds on art? And he said, then what is the point? Because you see, the thing is, I think the education factor is one very important thing which we have not addressed, and perhaps it's also a topic in itself. It's also something that is very important to think about. Somewhere, the awareness that we must create, which was being created earlier, as you said, and has now shrunk because either the pages go to entertainment or advertisement or to political things. And most times we are told, even by institutions and by institutions outside art, that India is a country which has huge, bigger problems than art. Okay? Now, unless we have that attitude that we have bigger problems than art, then
Art
art is
is
always
reflecting those problems.
Correct.
So
But that is
that
where
is reflecting our society.
till that disconnect is bridged,
Yes.
till that fine tuning and that link is that art is not something apart from life. It is so much about life and from our own lives, and it is so necessary to nurture our soul. If we don't do that, I mean, we know how we are going to be existing, and the future looks really, sometimes the uncertainty and the bleak future really it stands out in front of
And
us.
you're only talking about writing in newspapers. But if
no.
Hussain Saab could have
I'm
been
talking-
hounded out of India, it shows that the respect for art really needs to go to
We are
another
not
level.
countering that. I'm not against that. Only I'm saying that there is a lack of writing today. And how many critics do we have in Bombay? Art critics. You can count them on your fingertips.
As soon as we understand that art is a right, not a privilege, I think things will change then. As of now, it's not seen as a basic fundamental right to art. We see art as a luxury in India, where a few, who are the people who patronize art in a more formal sense? It is the elite, right? Whereas art is created by the common man who creates art. Each one of our artists has come from very humble beginnings.
Right? They're not problem. Listen, there's the common man will venture this some.
Okay, I think we have time for wind up. Okay, one last question.
Yeah, sorry, I'll make it a really brief one. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Tell me what is driving the values of NFTs? What is this NFTs all about?
Yes.
I don't know if the NFTs still have a value. I think there is a relook at NFTs and what they mean. There was a boom initially, but I don't think there still exists one. And I'm not sure. I certainly don't feel competent to answer that question. I don't know if anybody else on this panel
I
does.
mean, there's only one thing I can tell you, that NFT is already passé. The latest thing that happened a week ago is that the first artwork produced by AI was auctioned, I think, for $600,000. So now we've moved on to. But you know, the thing is, we can't rubbish these technological advances because AI created a Beethoven symphony. A unknown Beethoven symphony was taken, and the one by the greatest living composer was done in the style of Beethoven. In the rankings, the one done by the living guy came third, the one actually done by Beethoven came second, and the one done by AI came first, amongst a panel of, amongst an audience of Beethoven experts. So everything has its day, who knows where it will go.
Okay. I'd like to say thank you very much to this wonderful
Thank
panel.
you.
It's
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure.
Thank you.
And
Thanks a
thank
lot.
you everyone for being engaging
Thank
with
you
us.
everyone for coming.